to approximately 75 individuals. The January 2021 point-in-time count had 152 individuals, 1,167 sheltered individuals, and 1,319 total individuals. So looking after COVID, post-COVID, there are no more COVID-19 mass care sites. So the Sullivan Arena was used as emergency shelter, then was shut down as emergency shelter in June of 22, then was opened again in October of 22, and then most recently shut down again just a few days ago for the final time. Emergency cold weather shelter beefed up drastically to meet the need. So this is when you see the biggest increase in municipal spending when it comes to homelessness, and especially with emergency cold weather shelter. The municipality spent approximately $11.8 million during the 2022-2023 winter. Most of that, in fact I believe all of it, was alcohol tax, and that has been heavily relied on to pay for these kinds of needs over the years. Again, remember when I first talked about the alcohol tax, there are 3 different buckets, and so there are a lot of other priorities that are competing for alcohol tax funds, and it's going to reduce our ability to rely on that particular funding source for emergency cold weather shelter into the future. Post-COVID, most shelters went back to what I call a realistic census that really matches their staffing. So Brother Francis, pre-COVID, 240, during COVID, 75, and then they went back up to a number that they felt like they could adequately staff. So that's 120 individuals. Brother Francis Shelter feels fairly comfortable at that number. A couple of point-in-time counts. The January 2022 point-in-time count was 125 individuals unsheltered, 1,369 individuals sheltered, and 1,494 individuals total. The January 2023 point-in-time count was 335 individuals unsheltered, 1,425 individuals sheltered, and 1,760 individuals total. Again, this isn't a homelessness 101, but there are a lot of different references that I want to send folks to. The Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness has a lot of great information on it. And then there are a couple other websites. The Assembly has a homelessness focus page as well as a housing focus page on our website. Because whenever you talk about homelessness, you want to make sure that you're also talking about housing. So please refer to those pages for other information regarding homelessness in the municipality of Anchorage. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Owen with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness.
Thanks, Felix. My name is Owen Hutchinson. I work with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. We are something called a continuum of care, and continuum of care is what it sounds like. It's a spectrum of services, and it's a requirement to receive any federal Department of Housing and Urban Development money for our community. It basically ensures if a veteran becomes homeless, there are adequate services for that person. If a family becomes homeless, there is a shelter for families and housing options for families. And you have to ensure that you have all of those different services in order to receive any HUD money. HUD does not pay for emergency shelter, but we know that it's an important touch point for people who are camping or people who are staying in emergency shelter to get them out of shelter and into housing. And there's a way to run emergency shelter that really prioritizes that, and the big takeaway is that if it's safe inside the shelter, it is safe outside the shelter. If there is not theft, if you can walk away from your bunk and leave your phone on your bed charging and use the bathroom and come back, that kind of activity is mirrored on the outside. So safety for people experiencing homelessness is also safety for the neighborhood. And a big thing that we have been talking about with policymakers is that this emergency shelter, if the muni is to invest in it, should be a place they would be willing to go if they were ever to fall into homelessness. It should be a facility that we are proud of. It should be a facility that a neighborhood is proud to have in their neighborhood because it is well run, it is safe, and it is respectable. The 5 keys, the first one is housing first approach. When somebody walks into an emergency shelter, very quickly, the staff should be talking to that person about what their exit into housing looks like. The longer somebody stays in emergency shelter, the more expensive it is to get them into housing. Their service needs increase, and so we really want to be early having conversations about housing. And yes, meeting their basic needs, getting them fed, getting them a good night's rest so that they can have those conversations. But the focus is getting them into housing as quickly as possible. They might have a variety of needs. They might be having a substance use disorder, having a serious mental illness, and all of those things have specific medical interventions or counseling interventions that they need to address. But the thing that's going to stop their homelessness is housing. We also really want to focus on safe and appropriate diversion. This means sitting down with somebody and saying, what other family members do you have? What potential income or disability income do you have? Have you applied for vouchers? Really reducing the inflow into emergency shelter. Emergency shelter is really difficult to get placed into a permanent housing situation from. And so if we can decrease the stay in emergency shelter and get them quickly into housing, those other services that they might need are going to be more effective. And if we can avoid a stay in emergency shelter at all costs, we should. Immediate and low barrier access, meaning anyone in the community can come in and get a shower, get a meal. If they are elevated and unsafe to be around, they need to have a private place to go and not disturb the other people staying there. But people should know that it's open. When it's open, it should be open during the day. People should not be kicked out in the morning so that they can wander around the community. If they're working towards housing and doing applications and working with their case manager, they should absolutely be able to stay there and do those things. People need to know that they can wash their clothes so that they can go to a job interview. And these kinds of really reliable hours, consistent, and basic necessities have to be there for them to be able to use that to get out of the shelter. There is a diagram, and I apologize that the presentation is not working and I wouldn't read everything in this diagram, but there's a way for shelter providers to, as a team, work with the people staying there, and as a team decide how they're going to operate to increase the likelihood of people exiting into housing and not being in emergency shelter forever. People should not be in emergency shelter for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. They need to be out, and they need to be working with staff to move out. And part of that is really working with people on a one-on-one basis. So you are going off their behaviors. You're not just setting a rule that is applied universally, but really working with individuals to maximize their comfort and ability to work with the staff. This requires trust. This requires really complex analysis of a situation. This requires de-escalation. So we need staff who are working at the emergency shelters to be highly trained in working with a very complex population. Again, the housing focus and the rapid exit is really the most important aspect of an emergency shelter. This should not be a long-term place for anyone. It is stressful. If you have bunk beds, what you'll see is a lot of people won't stay on the top bunk because they have physical disabilities, right? So somebody going up a ladder at night and coming down to pee is really impossible. Or they'll store their stuff up there and then somebody comes in and there's not that bed for them. We see this at Brother Francis. I saw this at the DV shelter I worked at in Juneau, Alaska. The top bunks are like not a place where people want to sleep. So we have to really be thoughtful about how we are setting people up to get out as quickly as possible. And then we need data. So one of our roles as the COC with the federal government is we have to report who is falling into homelessness, were they housed, were they homeless before they were housed, how long were they housed for, how long are they experiencing homelessness, and then how quickly are they being housed, and what type of housing are they going into. Is it transitional housing? Is it rapid rehousing? Is it permanent supportive housing? Because from those housing types, which are still, homeless posture, we see higher rates of placements to permanent housing destinations. From emergency shelter, we see a very low rate into a permanent destination. So that is why the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development and us as the COC really focus on housing, even in emergency shelter. And my slides are also on the ACH website as well as the Muni site, so I apologize again, but I'm happy to share them with any of you who would like it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Owen, for walking us through that. So moving on to shelter licensing. In 2021, the Assembly passed an ordinance approving shelter licensing for really one primary reason. We needed a quality assurance tool. Licensing was never meant to be burdensome, but definitely had a lot of considerations for shelters. So I'm just going to read a little bit of the purpose and intent in this particular shelter licensing chapter in our code. So the purpose of this chapter is to establish minimum standards of care and operation for homeless shelters in the municipality, enable and maintain data collection and monitoring of the homeless population, to maintain appropriate oversight in order to provide individuals and families experiencing homelessness with the care and services needed, and mitigate impacts of neighborhood residents, businesses, property owners, and the users of the shelters. So it sounds pretty good in theory, but we're gonna walk through it. So shelter licensing had a variety of what I call neighborhood protections incorporated into it. So I'm just going to read through several of those. So one is that the director, meaning the Anchorage Health Department director or the assembly, may impose conditions or restrictions on a license if it is in the interests of the public to do so. Another neighborhood protection incorporated in shelter licensing is that a copy of a good neighbor policy that details the applicant's plan for community communication, minimizing neighborhood impacts, including policing or trashing and loitering on or near the premises, is required. There is a policy and procedures to ensure that there must be policies and procedures to ensure the safety of clients, staff, volunteers, and visitors. Because we know that if folks feel safe inside the shelter, less likely to have negative impacts outside the shelter. There needs to be policies and practices to deter and reduce client loitering and prohibited camping in parks and public spaces and other impacts on neighboring residents, businesses, and property owners. In one of the subsections in this particular chapter talks about minimizing neighborhood impacts. And there's two different commitments in that particular section, one dealing with the shelter's commitment and then one dealing with the municipality's commitment, because shelters can't do all of this work on their own, but the municipality needs to step up to assist. And so in that, you'll see that the municipality's commitments are pretty strong, and especially deals with ensuring that there are no unauthorized camping within a quarter mile of a licensed shelter. And then there's a whole section here on enforcement and the powers of the health department to enforce the provisions of shelter licensing and to help shelters. Because again, this wasn't meant to be burdensome, but to help shelters improve their services to clients. So, although shelter licensing went into effect on January 1st of this year, the only licenses that are current are provisional licenses. So we don't actually have any full-fledged licensed shelters within the municipality. I think we're working towards that. So largely, shelter licensing is not implemented. It will be, though, come November 1st, when a new shelter is stood up. That shelter will be fully licensed and complying with the shelter licensing provision. So it'll be a little bit of a test case with that new shelter. At this point, I'm gonna read through some slides that John Weddleton authored. So John was here yesterday to talk through examples of well-run shelter. But he's unable to join us today, and he's going to be here at the last town hall on Monday. So he apologizes for not being able to make it today. But John has a lot of experience going to different shelters all over the country and talking with the shelter providers and getting to know the different shelters from, not from the perspective of someone who's lived there for a long time, but from the perspective of someone who's seeing it for the first time and getting a chance to see whether that particular shelter has impacts or not on the neighborhood. So again, I'm just reading John's prepared slides. So from John's perspective, shelters can help areas where homelessness has been a problem. Shelters of all sizes can operate with no negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And he has 4 examples to go through. First is Pine Street Inn in Boston. So with a mission to end homelessness, Pine Street Inn is New England's leading provider of housing, shelter, street outreach, and job training to homeless men and women in greater Boston. Their main facility is an old fire station, but they have expanded to other facilities. The Pine Street Inn has over 500 residents. It's a low barrier shelter, but also has some rooms for longer stays and people who end up working there. There's no way to know it's a shelter except for the sign that says shelter. They have close relationships with the surrounding businesses and will address issues even if they are not from their residents. Pine Street Inn in Boston, the shelter is mostly men with 100 or so women who are in a separate part of the building and with a separate entrance. There are armed guards present, and across the street is a new high-end, high-rise condo development from the shelter. A second example that John had is the St. Francis House, also in Boston. So St. Francis House is an extensive service center for homeless less than a mile away from Pine Street Inn. The partnership of this and Pine Street Inn appears to be key to minimizing noticeable homelessness in the area. It's open 365 a year, and services include a day shelter, a large clinic, recovery support, a free cafeteria, job training, mailboxes, showers, a safe room for people high on drugs, and they serve an average of 500 people per day. And it's not far away is a low barrier shelter smaller than Pine Street Inn. The third example that John had is Open Door Mission in Omaha. Open Door Mission provides 917 shelter beds. They require residents to be sober and off drugs. It's not just congregate shelter, it's a campus with an array of services and activities and apartment housing for clients recovering and transitioning out of homelessness. Open Door has a store where low-income people can shop where everything is free. They can also work there to learn how to work. There's an extensive garden and 17,000 square foot greenhouse for residents. The operation includes a facility for women and families and a separate unit for veterans. Then another example that John had is the Sienna Francis House, also in Omaha. Like Open Door, Sienna Francis House is a campus providing a broad array of services, including low barrier shelter for men and women, food, clothing, and other emergency services, 24/7. It operates all year round, and average nightly use is 374 people. Sienna Francis House provides on-site permanent supportive housing, residential addiction rehabilitation services, and facility space for partnering organizations that provide housing resources, medical and mental health care, and other services. They also provide storage and showers for homeless who are not residents of the campus. And then the last example is Schrader House in Hollywood, California. So this low barrier shelter was opened in 2019 with 72 beds for men and women. The shelter was accompanied by a commitment to ban camping on the streets and sidewalks in the area. Basic services are provided, and there's an area for pets. And you can't see the pictures, but this particular one in Schrader House in Hollywood is a sprung shelter structure. So the next few slides, which you can't see, speak to some additional characteristics of shelters that are well run. So one of them is that they promote dignity and respect, and they have expectations of shelter guests that are clearly communicated, and they involve shelter guests in their operations and governance decisions. They, well-run shelters adopt meet people where they are and provide adequate services for navigation. So whether that's housing navigation or navigation to other services that you need, and that is a critical component of well-run shelters. And then last is that they are focused on housing first and getting people out of shelters. So shelter should never be a permanent solution for folks. It should be a stopgap, an emergency solution for folks until they're able to move on to whatever comes next. So now, last part of the presentation before we move on to the public participation. So moving on to criteria, which is the last set of these slides. The facilitated collaborative process, which is a process that was created in July of 2021, right after the Bronson administration came on board, was a collaboration between the Assembly and administration to try and find solutions. A lot of good came out of that process, including setting up a new housing project downtown and then complex care shelter in Midtown, North Anchorage District. But the one thing that we couldn't agree on was low barrier shelter. The group at the time came up with a list of criteria to consider in 3 phases. So first is initial screening criteria. Those things included availability, so is a particular parcel of land or building available for purchase? Are there utilities? Can you configure that particular building, if it's an empty building, for congregate care? Are we avoiding areas with high density of other operations? Are we avoiding conflicts with adjacent uses? Is the building condition good enough, or are we gonna have to spend a lot of capital funds to bring up a building to code? And is the particular area not in downtown or Fairview? Then they moved on to next level criteria, and it's a much more extensive list here. They looked at costs, both capital costs, operating cost, and then breaking it down to cost per client. They looked at proximity to medical health care, proximity to public safety services, proximity to personal supports, proximity to transportation. Is there safe ingress and egress? Is there space for services on site? Will you be able to have daytime activities? Are you going to be able to accommodate pets or couples? Is there storage on site? Is there some type of visibility buffer zone? What's the separation from schools? Is there existing population density surrounding the location? Are there going to be land use conflicts? And so those are a lot of the different next level criteria that the facilitated collaborative process looked at. And then there was a third set of criteria that's not really well defined, but the facilitated collaborative process called it long-term care criteria, and mainly focused around fencing. So can you provide that kind of site security on site? Does it meet the health and safety standards within municipal code and CDC recommendations, and is it zoned properly? The last set of criteria that has been used recently is criteria set up by the Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Task Force. So this task force was stood up by the Assembly to help us come up with a plan for the 2022-2023 winter. And because of the nature of this task force and the nature of the work, right, this is emergency shelter to help people get off the streets in our winters. And so the criteria were simple, 3 of them: that the shelter is open 24/7, that there is space to provide meals, and that there's availability of showers. Those were the 3 basic criteria that were looked at by that task force. So that's it. That's all the different criteria that have been looked at in the last 2 years at this point. So moving on to the audience participation. So a couple of ground rules for audience participation. First is that I am going to have a timer on my phone for 3 minutes, and you'll be able to hear it go off after your 3 minutes are done. I'm going to ask folks to please respect that. I'm going to ask folks to be solutions oriented. So while your comments can't be critical, and that is always something that's welcome, it's important for folks to remain focused on solutions so that at the end of the day we're in a better place than we began. And then feel free for folks to ask questions, and we will respond if possible. If not, we'll take questions offline and try to respond after the fact. Some helpful topics as we continue this work and some prompts that would be great for folks to respond to. Again, the part of the work we are on is really about criteria and shelter. So what criteria are important to you when it comes to shelter? When it comes to mitigation, what does neighborhood mitigation look like to you? And then what does well-run shelter mean to you? And for folks who came in, you probably noticed in the atrium, there were some sheets of paper on the wall. So if you're not comfortable participating in this public forum, folks can feel free to, there's some markers, feel free to write your own thoughts on those sheets of paper in the atrium. I think that, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off this mic because we can only have one mic on at a time. So when you come up to speak, please turn on the mic. And then I would ask you, if there's no one else, to please turn off the mic, because again, we can only have one mic on at a time. And just to repeat before we get started, for the folks who are online, again, welcome. Apologies that we don't have a slideshow for you to review, but again, the slides are on the Assembly website. If you go to our Homelessness Focus page, then go to the Clean Slate Strategy page, you'll be able to find the slides there. If you want to participate in this audience participation portion, the easiest way for you to do that is to do so via email with me. So that is my email, felix.rivera@anchorageak.gov. Again, that is felix.rivera@anchorageak.gov. With that, I will go ahead and turn off my mic and welcome folks to participate as you would like.
Got it. Thank you. My name is William Reiner. I'm a property owner here in Anchorage and the MOA. I had a couple of bullet points I wanted to hit. I'll keep it short though. I'm a no on supporting any kind of shelter, any locations at all. My points are going to be simple. There was a move to create legal marijuana, sales of it, and they've accomplished that. Everywhere in the city you can go and you can get it. So you got drug dealers selling pot just about everywhere. Okay, now you have folks that, for whatever reason, have dropped out. This isn't much different than from the 60s. Okay, so they've made that choice to participate in that drug culture. And now we have the problem that is ever increasing. So because of that, money has to be taken away from folks that, like a truck driver, has to be randomly drug tested to have employment. So he earns his living. He's in a random drug testing program that he pays for, and he then has the freedom and benefits of living where he wants and doing what he wants when he's not earning a living. Now, the MOA comes along and taxes him for people who don't earn a living, but they consider it earning a living, having to go get their needs taken care of because they have problems. And in a lot of cases, it's alcohol and drugs. So, be it. They can find a place, they can do their drugs, and they don't need any help doing that. But when they have recovery systems that enable them to not worry about shelter, food, any of the other things that Jim, the truck driver, has to worry about, then you go ahead and enable them to have only one worry, getting and doing their drugs. So without any kind of a random drug testing or a testing program, there's no point in housing them. You're just simply enabling them. So I'm a no on any housing for them at any time.
So hello, I'm Matt with the Spenard Community Council. We have a homeless problem in our city. They are in our community. They are making our neighborhood and our greenways unsafe for ourselves and our property and our pets. The shelters that we are putting in place, hopefully, knock on wood, are not going to fix any individuals. They are simply going to give us an ability to enforce the law. Right now, if you're camping on the street, there's no other place to put them. And our Constitution guarantees a right to privacy for those people, so we can't even search their tents because there's no place for them to go. So this is the low barrier shelter. And the criteria that we need the low barrier shelters to have is we need them to be safe. We need them to be safe for the people that are going there. And we need to realize that the person most likely to be going, our neighbor most likely to be going to these shelters, is going to be someone who has a chemical dependency, who has a mental illness, who has a physical frailty, people who are not going to be the kind of people that I would go hang out with, probably not the people that would come and be able to speak on a microphone at an assembly meeting. These are people who are in crisis mode, and anybody who goes to this low barrier shelter needs to be safe from the other people that are there. And that includes the people who go to prey on the people who are at the low barrier shelter. So, as you said, we need the places to be safe. We need their stuff to be safe while they're there. And they need to have access to counselors who can work on them. And like you said at the beginning before we got started, I don't think you can accomplish that goal of having a safe facility for the people who are suffering from a homeless crisis in a tent. I don't think you're going to get it if there's 400 people there. I think the only way to get it is if there's under 100 people, and you're going to have a brick and mortar structure that has individual rooms, so when someone is high, having a mental health crisis or a mental health episode, that they can be isolated safely from the other people, for their safety and for the other people's safety. So that's what I would like to see in our shelters that we're going to build. Then that's, any questions from anybody? Oh, okay. Matt Duncan, D-U-N-C-A-M.
Thank you, by the way.
Would anyone else like to participate? Again, we do have, although I think I saw one of them fall down, sheets of paper on the wall in the atrium, if you're not comfortable participating in this public forum, that you can write your thoughts down. Yeah, come on down, Ron.
Does anyone else want to speak? Because I speak at every meeting, I won't take up your time. Oh, hello, all right. Beam me up, Scotty. No intelligent life here. Anyway, I was here yesterday and I went back home and looked at the criteria and the mitigation and the solutions. So I tried to target that by, again, offering 3rd and Ingram. I don't think you should ban any location in the city like downtown or Fairview, because a well-run shelter or a sanctioned camp should be put anywhere in the city, next to a church, next to a school. You should have the safeguards in place. That's a stretch, but hey, don't eliminate Fairview or downtown. My area, I'm offering you 3 acres adjacent to the shelter, but more importantly, adjacent to the navigation center, not only for a sanctioned camp, but also the possibility for establishing tiny homes, pallet homes, a stepping stone to the low barrier shelter. But the navigation center is the key, because that offers the gateway for these people to get to housing. So it's all temporary, but my property was vetted, studied with a $50,000 study by Agnew Beck, recommended by the Fairview Community Council, the 3rd Avenue Radicals. Even when I met with the Brother Francis Shelter, they felt the purchase of that property would be in the best interest. And the people are there. You can go to the old Native Hospital site right now, and I think I counted 87 tents. That's not including the motorhomes, the pickup trucks, the vans, and you have to remember the Hope Shelter is right down the street, but more importantly, the drug Kiwana House, I believe, is for methadone treatment and the drugs. So I think the location's right. The mitigation is in place. We know what happened. Mr. Wellington said what happened to me was disastrous, and it still is. But you have the existing campers there. This is a great location. And the most important thing you have to recognize, you spread those little campsites, even less than 100, you have no money. According to the homeless coordinator, we spent $24 million on temporary facilities, hotels. The budget coming up is for $4 million. You'll never be able to finance those. And once those campers acclimate to other locations in the city, they're gonna anchor in. So you wanna get them as close to the navigation center as possible. Any questions?
I have one.
Mr. Reiner, you're not the famous editor, Reiner.
No,
Okay,
maybe I am.
it's all right, don't disclose. I like anyone who gives community input. What's your question?
How do you feel about little houses? Because I've seen little houses built in Los Angeles for homeless, and they turned out being a boondoggle in construction materials. Everything, electrical was all commercial grade for a little 10 by 12 little house.
Sure.
And would you have objection placing that on your property?
Oh, no whatsoever. Those are tiny homes, and they don't really there's a lot of negativity to it in keeping them sanitary, et cetera, so negative effects. But tiny homes could be there along with pallet homes. And I suggested real quickly, don't give them tents. I just went to the transfer station. They have over 200 excess dumpsters that can be modified into upstairs, and they can't be mobile. You give them tents, they're going in the woods. You clean it up, sanitize it, paint it. You can put a stack of bunk in there, storage. They lock and they protect better from the weather, and you can't move them. So don't think you're putting them in a dumpster. You're putting them in a repurposed metal container, similar to making a tiny home out of a Connex. But the best part about my facility is Hope Center came down and looked at it as a transformation center for training. That would be bicycle repair, car detailing, a small lumber mill, recycling the $3 million the city spent on spruce logs. They could make rough cut lumber and fabricate little homes there, along with Habitat to Humanity, who I had to do 40 hours of community service. They could make that an industrial building sales lot, and you would get the supplies, also donations, and the homeless can kind of get trained with just the minimal of skills to get out there and work everywhere from a car wash, bicycle repair, and then making firewood. It's not that difficult. And they gain some self-dignity with being a contributing member of society. And then also, the needle van. I came to Beans and Brother Francis twice a week. The methadone clinic is close. You gotta get these people off drugs. And you can't spend 1.1 million on an outreach program sending those counselors across the city, because they'll lose more time and resources in transportation. But if you got the campers close to the navigation center, it would be easy for them to interview them, document their issues, family members, etc., and then move to the next step. And
Thanks, Ron.
thank you. Any other questions?
I got another question.
Okay.
Actually, Ron, we're gonna move on, but thank you, sir.
But that's all right. I always consider any dialogue important. And
Will those properties be available for,
I'm gonna ask you two to take this offline, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll encourage you to continue that conversation.
That's all right, we're silent. Duly noted.
Good afternoon. My name is Walter Listener. I live on the east side, and I appreciate your efforts and the challenges that everybody has here in the community of Anchorage. Our predecessors prior to you, back in 2019, had come up with a plan. And the people the stakeholders that supported them was East Downtown Action Group, Fairview Community Council, Downtown Community Council, Alaska Food Policy Council, Anchorage Community Development Authority, Anchorage Community Land Trust, Anchorage Downtown Partnership, Anchorage Metropolitan Area Transportation Solutions, Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, Alaska Railroad, South Central Foundation, Beans Cafe, Brother Francis Shelter, Catholic Social Services, Anchorage Police Department, Native Village of Eklutna, Eklutna Incorporated, State of Alaska Department of Transportation, Indian Health Service, State of Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Rasmussen Foundation. Los Angeles had a tremendous homeless problem. And in 2021, they were able to house over 400 within 6 months. Look it up. We have a problem. I want Anchorage to be as good as Los Angeles in taking care of their homeless. But the problem is, we keep on wanting to scatter out to wherever we can stretch and find something. Do you want to pick a place in East Anchorage in a vacant lot? That's not the solution. It's a block away from the schools. Our safety for our children. Don't take up the parks. Don't take up the campgrounds. That's where our children want to go and play and enjoy their life. You're taking that away from them. You do the same thing for the Spadard Activity Center. How dare you try to take that away from any of our children? Those kids need that, okay? It really upsets me when you proposition buying a building and things like that in a community, because they really don't have a choice whether you're gonna buy it or not. Pick vacant land that was used in the past. And what I'm referring to, there's a 34-page plan that was put together in 2019. It's the former Alaska Native Service Hospital Master Plan. You know what I'm talking about? There was 10 acres plus another 5 acres where the old Alaska Native Hospital was located. I wish I had more time. But that land has everything planned out for a community. It had a kitchen, has a park, has everything provided for a small community. Why can't we just modify that plan, use that land to help the homeless? We also need to take those people that have some really serious problems like drugs and alcohol. My ex has an alcohol problem. She was at the Clitheroe, not an alcohol, but a drug problem. She went to the Clitheroe Center. That's where they belong. They belong outside the community where they're safe, and our children are safe from that. Look again at the Alaska Native Health Plan for 2019. It's an awesome program. You guys can make it work for the homeless as well. Don't take them away from downtown Anchorage. Downtown Anchorage has all kinds of sources, and that's where everything originated. Brother Francis Shelter, Food Bank, all of them. I do appreciate you trying, and I do appreciate you trying to find what you can with what you got in place. But your predecessors already developed this plan, and I read every single one of them that were stakeholders in it. Why didn't we go back and look at what our predecessors did and wanted to do? Please, take the time. I wanted to come and mention to you 3 to 4 years ago before the coronavirus, because we should have addressed this 5 to 10 years ago and started working on this. Meanwhile, we have land that still could be utilized. Also, I don't think we have to have a hard building, structured building that we have to buy. We can put a dome on a vacant land and put your bunk beds that you have at the Sullivan. Don't take the Sullivan away from our children. You are hurting me, you're hurting my children in becoming awesome children in our life. Be role models like you up here. When you take those things away from our children, you're taking it from our family and your family and our future. Please isolate and pull all the homeless people. Put them in different stages. You have those that just can't even take care of themselves. Put them in an area, whether it's on the 10 acres or 5 acres, segregate them. Also, the Los Angeles, they use connexes. They have 135 square feet. They had bathrooms. You don't have to use bathrooms. You can put outhouses in there. But connexes don't burn down. You can stack them. You can get them. We talked about doing a hotel downtown built out of connexes. Why aren't we even thinking of that for the homeless? It's an instant structure. You could put and stack them and make them accountable. You guys were talking about that. And I think it's a great idea. If they don't keep their place clean, they're going to clean it, and then we're going to put them down to a different level where they are going to be monitored more closely. They are successful in Los Angeles. Why can't we go and listen and learn from them?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I think so. Let's check.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. It's greatly appreciated. And I want to say this to everybody here. This is an unbelievably complex problem. Our homeless problem needs our humanity. They're human beings, and they need our help, and they need as much attention as we can give them. However, we also are in a state where our community is in crisis. Literally, our lifestyle is at risk because of the homeless population spreading across our streets. There's all kinds of issues with it. I've made some notes here, and I've given a report to Mr. McCarty there, and I'm going to send it to you email. I would like to have it distributed, but I spent several weeks studying the issue, so I feel like I have some understanding of it. Also, I'm an engineer. I've had a lot of experience managing multi-housing, both private and government. I managed a long-range radar, 14 sites for about a decade, and that every site includes every amenity needed except counseling. So I have some experience with it, and I believe that I can help. There's a number of things that I think need to be discussed. I think there's a lot of solidification of opinion already, and the idea of spreading the population around is pretty well entrenched, I believe, among some of us. I think that's a mistake. The gentleman spoke earlier about impacting our neighborhoods and our children, and that is a serious, serious issue. Our homeless population is full of addicts, full of mental health issues, full of communicable diseases and infestations. We don't realize it, but it's there. And when we move those close to neighborhoods, we're impacting a neighborhood, the quality of life of those neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods have children's moms, just like all of us. And you don't want those people in the way of your children getting to and from school and the playground and all of that. Another thing, the gentleman mentioned the fact that our recreational facilities are absolutely being hammered with this problem, and it's wrong. These people are taxpayers. They're citizens of our community, and they pay for those facilities to be available to their families and their children. And all of a sudden, they're not. It's not safe to go. If you want to feel unsafe for a minute, go alone into the homeless community that is in the southeast corner of Mountain View Drive and McCarty Street. Southeast corner. You walk through there alone and you're in danger. I've done it a few times, and I'll tell you, you watch your back. And there's a reason for it. Those communities are at risk, and not just the people like us that can go home, but people that live there that are kind of stuck there have to live with that. Okay, anyway, those people need a lot of services. They need rehab facilities, although not all of them are acceptable to rehab. Addictions are a terrible thing, and they're a demon that some people never can get a grip on. They have to be... Yikes. Can I continue since we're almost over? Okay, a facility needs a lot of amenities. They need counseling. They need job opportunities, job counseling. Every village in Alaska, I believe, has a community health center. I've been to most of them. Those facilities are plenty adequate. They've got a healthcare worker and they serve a large community. If you pick the right site in a central location and don't scatter them everywhere, but pick a good central location, you can provide all of those amenities on site and keep the population basically there. The thing about the old Native Health Clinic or hospital was brought up, and I advocate those so strongly I can hardly explain it. The site is perfect. It's large. It's got 10 acres, and again, you can add to it. There's room to add to it. There's room to provide a facility that's housing, and that within that housing unit, you can have offices for administration, security, counseling, health clinic, all of that can be consolidated. It's much more efficient than scattering a population across the city and trying to deal with those people individually. And just to have a clinic there, you don't need to have it next to a hospital, because most of the problems that are health-wise that those people have don't need a hospital. They just need a clinician that knows what to do and that can help them. The site of the old hospital is perfect. All the utilities are in. It's simply a matter of hooking up to them. You can go over there right now and you'll see fire plugs and all kind of stuff. I mean, it's all there. The soil is good. It housed a huge hospital at one point, so the soils are good. It's in a perfect neighborhood. Very close adjacent is a prison, one of the largest ones in Alaska. You've got an industrial area that encompasses the entire north side of it. To the south, the business community provides blocks of buffer between that and residential areas. There's a small residential area on 3rd Avenue, but it's small. There's offices, there's a lot of abandoned buildings because the neighborhood isn't real active. We mentioned about not wanting to get those people next to residential areas. You don't want to put them next to a business community. Businesses are struggling in our community, and you don't want them to find homeless people sitting in their entryway, which you now find. You find homeless people sitting out there and panhandling and occupying and in the way. It's wrong. There's so many advantages to consolidating the population. From an economic standpoint, a lot of others. I just read a study that was done in San Francisco on their homeless population. They have tried to scatter them, like has been discussed here quite often. They're having horrible times with it, horrible. Infestations are so bad in most of those facilities that a lot of homeless people won't even go there. They literally say they'd rather be out in a rather be out in a tent than to be stuck in one of those places. Major facility you can monitor, but gives that area for socializing, for outdoors, to spread the population so that family groups can sit and visit together. You can provide recreation for them. You can provide job opportunities. There's a garden plot there now that's never been used, been there 4 years, that can teach some responsibility. Anyway, I strongly advocate that. I've written a report. I'll send it to you, sir. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I don't envy you at all, because you've got a tough job, all of you. And nothing you do is going to be without criticism. Every solution that you have has pluses and minuses. Every solution that's available. You have to pick the one that will solve the problem best with the least damage, and I believe strongly that it's the old Native Hospital site on 3rd Avenue. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions.
I have a question. Back there.
Go ahead, you can ask one question.
Are you aware in San Juan, Puerto Rico, they had a single site area that their homeless population went to?
I'm not
They tried to-
aware of what's going on there.
Are you aware of that?
I'm not. Are you kidding?
Okay, well, that should be taken into account
We'll have
and
to
studied.
study it.
You should look at that, because then you'll see what happened next.
Thank you.
It ain't gonna happen. Thanks.
Roger Branson, community member, longtime mental health advocate. Sitting here in the audience, it is just so painful, the dehumanization of us versus them, it's constantly us versus them. And they have children too. They have loved ones, they have parents, they have siblings, they're human beings. If we can't reach out to help our fellow neighbor, our brothers and sisters, and do it in love and charity, all the money in the world is not going to fix the problem. If we don't start with a sincere, authentic desire to help them, to give them a hand up, not a handout, and give them the opportunity to accept that gift in that spirit, then we have lost sight of who we are as human beings. And I really thank the community for the work that we have done these past few years. This has been, it's been a long time since the mental health institutions were deinstitutionalized and homelessness started becoming an issue. amongst those who need different services. So I thank everybody for coming out for the opinions expressed, and that's all.
All right, so I'll just open it up one last time to see if anyone else would like to speak. If not, I'll go ahead and move us on to our closing. Oh, yeah, come on up.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Can you do it in the mic though? Okay, that's fair.
November 11th, what was the statement you made about November 11th? The shelter was going to open
November 1,
November 1.
yes.
Okay, so the shelter's going to open November 1 with new shelter licensing.
So November 1 is the goal. So if you go back in March of this year, the Assembly passed a resolution adopting the Clean Slate strategy. In that strategy, we set a goal for us to get a new permanent year-round low barrier shelter open by November 1st. The shelter licensing, which I talked about, is something the Assembly passed in 2021 and became effective January 1st of 2023, but it still really isn't implemented. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's all I was wondering. So no shelters have opened since, no shelters have opened since that regulation.
No, no new shelters have opened, and all of the current existing shelters are under provisional licenses, so they're not really impacted by shelter licensing requirements.
Okay, that's all.
I have a question. The 5 proposed sites.
Okay.
So I'm about to turn on the top. Hello, Anthony Lucy, Anchorage resident. When is the decision for the 5 proposed sites? I guess.
Oh, you're talking about sectional camping?
Yeah, sectional camping.
Yeah.
Is that like soon or?
I know, yeah. So, so the question was around sanctioned camps. So the sanctioned camp community task force on, I think it was May 23rd, or 22nd rather, they put forward a resolution that the Assembly considered on May 23rd, decided not to consider, and it had 5 proposed sanctioned campsites on it. That resolution is going to be back before us, but in a different form. So there's an S version that the Assembly looked at yesterday at a work session, and then there's going to be an S1 version that the Assembly is going to have before us on June 6th. But the current version, the current public version, does have 5 different sites on it, and that's going to be before us on June 6th.
We'll get to see that.
Yeah. So yes, the S1 version, which is not done yet, that will be before the Assembly on June 6th, and that we'll do our best to get that public and out as quick as possible. Hopefully by Monday, everyone will get a chance to see it.
I had asked her a question earlier about how much it would cost to actually complete the navigation center, and you said you had reached out to the mayor, and you said we still owed Roger Hickle $12.5 million, and then they're saying that it would be another $7 million to finish, so overall close to 20. Is that my understanding?
No, yeah, so 7 million and the 12.5, so 19.5 million without a interior amenities that I've been able to confirm. I asked Kent Olhasty, I should be talking in my time. Sorry. I asked the municipal manager to confirm that, and he never did. So the way the original cost of the Tudor Elmore Navigation Center ballooned, I'm really fearful of hidden costs. And so, this is why it's scary for me that that's still on the radar. And I also want to say it would be nice the mayor was here. This is a huge burden on just public and assembly. He should be a very big part of this.
I mean, that's a question. As Anchorage representatives who make these decisions, do you feel that I watched yesterday, it don't look like there's been more than the same 20 people here. So do you feel that this is a good pool of information to make decisions for the whole city, I guess? That's a fair question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that question. So we have a third town hall on Monday where we're going to be going over the same content, and we'll actually have this working, so people will actually be able to see the slides. So as always, we are going to do our best to communicate this information as broadly as possible to all parts of our community. We have a whole variety of ways to do that, whether that's social media, email lists, trying to get the media to do this, live streaming so that there's recordings, so that people can look at it after the fact. We will do our best. Community councils, although most community councils aren't meeting this summer, but before they stopped meeting, I talked ad nauseum with all of my community councils about this stuff. So, we will continue to do our best to try to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. The whole point of this is that there is a process for those who are interested in partaking in the process to come to these town halls, to come to committee meetings. There's going to be a second series of town halls, which I'm going to get to here soon. So there is a lot of ability for folks to engage in the dialogue and be a part of the solution. And I will continue to encourage folks to do that.
I just want to add that the Coalition to End Homelessness, as the continuum of care, did an emergency shelter survey. We have about 160 responses to that survey. We went to shelters to get lived experience input. We talked to the providers of the shelters, and we also sent it out to the community. So we will be reporting the results of that survey and our smaller meetings that we held at the next homelessness committee meeting.
A follow-up question. We had talked about, say $20 million to finish the shelter tent per se, but we're saying we need something by the 1st. So has there been proposals by the 1st for that amount of bedding and how much that would cost to apples and apples cost comparison versus spreading, I guess, is there a cost that you could relate that to?
Well, I was going to say, I can't see why we wouldn't be able to use the Sullivan Arena cots in some way. I mean, those weren't destroyed or moved away, so I think we've got to start on that. I know, I was going to address, I went to the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness meetings and the other meetings that Felix has been regularly having, and they've been packed. So, I mean, I know this looks bad, like, this is all that cares, but we're getting, all of us assembly members are getting a barrage of emails trying to dispel myths of things that you may have heard, or the confusion. I was even confused between Clean Slate, which is a shelter, and the sanctioned camping and how that was all working, because this is all going on at once. And hats off to all of the assembly members who came before me and all of the coalition of what has already been going on in our community. It's pretty astounding, all the hotels, conversions that have gone on and continue to go on. And that's the really important part. But it's really jaw-dropping that we're at this place and you look at every park and you see people, and as Roger says, we have to remember that they are people that need our compassion and just need the right services. And I'm gonna give it to Felix.
Yeah, thanks. So the question of resources is top of mind for a lot of folks, right? So we have a limited amount of resources to do a variety of things, right? So on June 6th, as I've said, the Assembly is going to have before it the decision on sanctioned camps and how to move forward or not with that idea. That's one idea that's going to take resources. The second thing that's going to take resources is permanent year-round low barrier shelter, whatever that looks like in the end. That's going to take resources. And then the third thing that we need to make sure we have resources for the end of the year is the 2023-2024 Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan. Because we know, so regardless of what happens, however much shelter gets stood up, however much housing gets stood up, sanctioned camps get stood up, doesn't matter. We're still going to have a population of unsheltered individuals who are going to need shelter in the cold this next winter. So those are the three, in my mind, three big things that are going to be competing for a limited amount of resources. And so that's the very complex and very difficult job that we have to do as representatives is figure out how to best use those resources. In terms of how do we get to that decision, so specifically for shelter, and I'm just going to walk through this because I think this is the last few slides, I'm just talking about the process. So at the Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting in June has 3 meetings scheduled. I'm not going to give you all of the dates and times and all of that stuff. I'll encourage folks to go to the website. All of that information is on the page. But there are 3 meetings scheduled wherein the goal for that is to develop the criteria, because we've talked about that a bit here today, of what we want shelter to look like in our community. And one of the things that has never happened is that we've never formally, as a municipality of Anchorage, adopted criteria for shelter. The facilitated collaborative process developed criteria, but that was never formally adopted. The emergency cold weather shelter developed criteria, but that was never formally adopted. So we're gonna go through that process to formally adopt criteria for shelter, and that is gonna be before the assembly. The goal is to get this on the agenda for the June 20th meeting, and then have a public hearing and vote at the July 11th meeting. And then after we adopt criteria on July 11th, then we're going to start talking about locations. Because first, we need to know what we want, and then we can start looking at what locations match what we want as a community for shelter. So we'll start talking about locations in July, and a lot of this work is going to happen in the Housing and Homelessness Committee. Once we finesse and fine-tune locations that match criteria, have that short list of locations, then we're going to shop that short list of locations out to the community and have a second series of town halls. Again, all of the dates and times and locations for those second series of town halls are on the website. And then from there, that's when the tough decisions have to be made. After we've gone through the process to hear from folks, then we got to make a decision and get something stood up by the end of the year.
Felix, can you allocate $500 and buy a portable time clock? Nothing's more, I think, insulting or rude as you get a little beeper on your phone, and this gentleman was intense, and then it gets disrupted for the final flow and summary of 3 minutes. I think it would be a courtesy to every speaker that they see the clock as it ticks.
Thanks, John. I'm happy to reach out to the municipal clerk to see if that's something that we can purchase. I like the idea of a mobile version.
Sure.
I can see.
If the municipality gets involved, it's going to be a $5 million clock. If you don't get it, come see me.
What?
I'll steal one from one of the schools.
Does the assembly have a vetting process before they allocate funds, the kind of specifically, we gave money to I believe, a food bank in South Anchorage, close to $2 million or something. And I don't think we've seen that return.
Yeah, thanks. So there's 2 different processes, right? There is the normal process when we don't have huge sums of money that come to us from the federal government, and that is through the budget process. And we put things out to a competitive bid. The administration does all the vetting to see which of the bidders meet the criteria, then they send that to the assembly for approval. So that's the normal Title VII process for us to make expenditures in a wise decision for the municipality. Then I think the other process, which was very new to the assembly, new to the administration, was what do we do when we have these huge sums of money that come to us? And we had that in 2020, 2021, and 2022 with CARES Act and ARPA 1 funds and ARPA 2 funds. And so with that, the assembly engaged in a process to figure out how we wanted to use that money, set up some criteria of here are the lanes that we want to spend that money in, here are the priorities that we have for spending of that money. And then we went out to the community and we said, okay, here's what we want to spend the money on, give us your proposals for what you can do that matches our priorities. And so we got a lot of different proposals from the community. You know, one of the things that frankly never came up in the conversation, never envisioned, is that folks would be coming to us with fraudulent proposals. Not once in any of the conversations that we had did anyone even think that that is something that might happen. I think we've learned now that we need to be much more cautious if we're ever in a position where we do have this magical federal funds and we have, you know, tens of millions of dollars to spend, of how we go through the process to vet proposals that come to us. I think that is a lesson learned.
So, we didn't get that money back?
So that's a federal process. The federal investigators are looking into that issue. My suspicion is that we wouldn't, as a municipality, get the money back. I imagine that the federal government would be the one that gets the money back.
Yeah, that was a very critical time. There's a lot of Anchorage residents upset about the assembly and how they pissed basically a bunch of the CARES Act money down the drain. And that, you know, that's a pretty prime example. I believe the Anchorage Assembly had several lawsuits against them for colluding with each other and some of that reckless spending. Am I not mistaken on that?
Yeah, thanks. So I think we're going to have a little bit of a difference of opinion, Anthony, about the spending for the 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Having been a part of that process, I think we were able to put forward, I think, a great program for spending those funds in a way that was equitable, in a way that met the needs of our community, helped folks stay housed, helped folks stay in their homes and keep their homes, helped folks meet basic needs, and helped businesses as much as possible stay open. So I think by and large, speaking for myself, feel like we did as good of a job as possible with the federal funds that we had. Specific to the lawsuits that you're mentioning, there is one particular lawsuit brought forward specifically around records retention and communication of assembly members, and specifically around texts and deleting texts, and that is an ongoing lawsuit.
So would that be safe to say that is a continuing ongoing program with the Anchorage Assembly, or hopefully we're not doing that anymore?
Thanks. So the advice that assembly members are given is to reach out to Assembly Council or to Department of Law if they have questions about record retentions and what they should or should not do when it comes to record retentions. So there is no uniform policy for the Assembly with regard to records retention.
I think we're digressing.
Yeah,
You guys have a great day.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
just
too.
thank you.
Thanks for coming out.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming to this. We're going to have a third town hall on this specific issue, and it's going to be the same framing on Monday. So if anyone wants to come and actually see the slides, you'll be able to do that on Monday. Otherwise, I want to encourage everyone to stay engaged in the process. The next phase of the process is going to be a variety of housing and homelessness committee meetings. You can attend those in person or watch them on YouTube. Again, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
They got a respect of wisdom.
Yes. Yeah, they have